find a seat and sit on it. That would be lovely. Including everybody over in the kitchen area. You can bring your lovely teas and spring rolls, chocolate cake. And if you're... It's gone. It's gone again. How are you feeling? Yeah, great. You couldn't have more pieces of paper if you tried. Okay. No. Okay. No.
No, Joe, it's not. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. But it's not coming out on the mics on the PA. Okay. That's good.
Okay. So if everyone just comes and sits down, including everybody in the kitchen. I know the chocolate cake is good, but you've got to leave it. Okay, you've got to come and sit down. Okay, so I'd just like to say a very, very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Father Richard, and I have the great joy and privilege of being the parish priest here at Our Lady of Fatima in White City. And before I hand over to Francis, I just wanted to explain why we're here. So this is an event which kind of came out of a bit of blue sky thinking earlier this summer. Our parish Care for Creation team was looking forward to this season of creation, which we celebrate every September and October. And we were very aware that this year there would be a particularly urgent focus with the COP26 conference on the horizon. We were very aware that that is very much concerned with those power makers in the world, our political leaders, economic leaders, who pull the big levers, who make the big decisions. And we pray for them that when it comes to Glasgow, they will have the courage and the humility and the boldness to make the decisions that need to be made at this time in our human history. But we also thought, well, you know, we have to ground this in our local community, in our real lives. I don't know if any of you, did any of you watch the amazing, and I thought it was absolutely wonderful, the Earthshot series which started last Sunday evening with Prince William? Did anyone watch it out of interest? It was on BBC One, 6:05, the first of 5 series. Really fantastic. I really, really encourage you to watch it. Very realistic about what's happening in the world, but also very hopeful. And what really struck me with that was that looking realistically at the big problems of our planet at this time, and looking for solutions. And time again, the solutions that Prince William and the team were highlighting were coming from the grassroots. They were bottom-up solutions. Small communities in different parts of the world, individuals with brilliant ideas. And that really struck a chord with me, because I think for anything to take root, for anything to happen and to change in this world, it has to happen in the local. It has to happen in real communities and real people's lives. Yes, those big levers at the top are incredibly important. Of course they are. There are systems that need to change. But it's what happens on the ground that is often the most important and the biggest impact in the long term. So that's the idea for this evening. We are celebrating living in Hammersmith and Fulham, living in White City, living in our local area. What we can do as part of our communal effort and our individual effort to tackle and reverse climate change. And what can we do as a community? All of the big ideas, and we're going to hear from our panel this evening, but how do we actually connect? So it's not a them and us. It's not these people up here have got all the answers and we've kind of somehow got to point fingers at each other. No, we've got to leave all that behind. We've got to be in this together. We've got to work together. And it's got to be absolutely rooted in our lives, in our communities. So that's what we're doing. We're bringing the big themes of COP26 and everything we're going to be hearing and talking and praying about in the coming weeks. We're bringing them right down here to our lives. The pavements, the playgrounds that we step on, that we walk on. What can we do? So that's the idea for this evening. So it is without further ado and a huge joy that I pass the microphone over now to our chair for the evening. And I'm going to really enjoy saying this next part. Our newly elected councillor for Wormholt and White City, Francis Umer.
Thank you very, very much, Father Richard. Thank you very much, everyone. How is everyone? Okay? Okay. Wonderful to see you all. Wonderful to be joined by a wonderful online live stream community. So you're very, very welcome too. So, I mean, as Father Richard said, I mean, this is pretty much the biggest crisis humanity and our planet has faced in over 2,000 years. So it's a real honor and a privilege to be here to discuss this very, very urgent and important matter with everyone this evening. So before we get started, just a couple of things to say that it'll be an absolute pleasure and delight to hear all your questions. Please, as much as possible, let's keep the conversation focused on climate change and the urgent action that we all need to take. We'll also be taking questions through the chat on our social channels as well, so please do feel encouraged to post on there as well. And yes, I hope it'll be a really fruitful discussion this evening. So, without further ado, let's actually start by turning to our esteemed panel and asking each member to introduce themselves. So, can we begin with you, Hinesh, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me, which sounds like you can. So hi everyone, I'm Hinesh Mehta. I'm the strategic lead for the climate and ecological emergency at Hammersmith and Fulham Council. So I've been in the role for a couple of years, almost a couple of years. So I lead a small team at the council. We work across the whole organisation and across the borough to try and decarbonise every part of our lives and every part of our built environment and everything else that goes with it. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Hinesh. Pat.
Hello, everybody. I'm Pat Tukey. I live locally in the borough and have done for 45 years. I'm part of a group of residents who are trying to imagine 2030, how life will be in 2030 in this borough. And incidentally, I'm also part of Extinction Rebellion locally.
Thank you, Pat. Andy.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Volume, yeah, that's fine. I'm Andy Slaughter. I'm the MP for Hammersmith, which of course includes White City and Wormholt. And I'm the non-expert on this panel, so it's a bit intimidating for me. But of course, a huge proportion of what I get, of the thousands of emails I get every week, one way or another, are about climate change. And that doesn't matter. They could be about aviation. They could be about cycleways. They could be about many things. I'm sure we're going to touch on tonight. So I've got some knowledge I've cribbed off my constituents at least.
Thank you, Andy. Philippa.
Hi everyone, I am Philippa Robb and I've just newly joined the council. Actually, I've been a resident in Hammersmith and Fulham for 25 years and until recently I ran a cycle training company and now I am a senior smarter transport officer at Hammersmith and Fulham. So I work within the transport department looking after active travel, walking, cycling, scooting, etc.
Thank you very much. And I think perhaps a little round of applause for our panel who've joined us this evening, and a round of applause for everyone who has joined this evening and is on the live stream community. So thank you, everyone. Okay, and also just to add, in addition to having questions and discussions this evening, we're also going to be showing 2 videos. So just to prepare yourself for some content that's come through from the local community, which will really help enrich the conversation further. So, without further ado, it's over to you. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask the panel? We have also received questions in advance, so I can refer to the list, but it would be fantastic if there is anyone in this space that would like to ask a question. Thank you. We have a mic coming over to you, so when the mic gets to you, please do introduce yourself. Just tell us your name and your question.
Hi, I'm Della. I'm a local resident. I'm delighted that Hammersmith and Fulham have declared a climate emergency, which sounds a bit of a paradox, but I'm glad because it means that they've employed an emergency crisis team. Hinesh is heading up. I understand there's a good, strong team of about 10 people, and Hammersmith and Fulham have set an ambitious plan to make the borough carbon neutral by 2030. I would love to know more details about how that's going to be achieved. And I would love to know more about what initiatives your team, Hinesh, are taking and hopefully advertising and hopefully putting out there to the community who will be able to collaborate, take part and become aware of. So the more knowledge we have, the more opportunities we can take part in local initiatives would be very, very welcome.
Thank you very much, Della. Over to you, Hinesh.
Thanks for the question. So first thing to say, yes, we do have a very good climate team at the council, about 8 or 10 people. 8 or 10 people isn't enough to solve the climate crisis, certainly not in a big borough like Hammersmith and Fulham, so we work with actually lots of people across the whole council and beyond the council to decarbonise everything that we do. So there's a lot of people involved, lots of good people involved working on that. The first thing I'd say we need to look at is the strategy, how we're going to get to a net zero future or a low carbon or carbon zero future. So we've recently approved and published our strategy on how we're going to get there. That strategy is split up into several challenges. So we're looking at the big challenges that we need to act on. And within all of those challenges, there are lots of ways of residents and organisations in the community can get involved. So those challenges are decarbonising homes, buildings and energy, travel and transport, the things we use, so all the things we buy and use, and how we decarbonise that. Ecology, we also declared an ecological emergency, and there is a biodiversity crisis, so we have a strategy on how we will renew biodiversity. And the final challenge is adapting to climate change. So there are already elements of climate change already happening, some in the borough, and we need to adapt and prepare for some of those things, prepare our people, prepare our ecosystems, and prepare our infrastructure. So those are our challenges. I won't go through all of them in detail. I'd encourage you to look at our website for a bit more detail on that. And sorry, ways of getting involved. We've got quite a large program of activity happening at the end of this month in advance of COP26. So building on this momentum for a big global summit happening in Glasgow, and we're putting on lots of local programs to help share knowledge, build knowledge in the community, get involved in local climate action, and learn from learn from not just from us, but from each other as well about things that are happening in the community. So all of that is going to go live on our website by the end of the week, so you can sign up and get involved in all of that.
Thank you. And Pat, I wondered, do you want to add a perspective from Imagine 2030, please?
Yeah, actually, I'll add a perspective from being one of the residents on the resident-led commission. Because after the council declared the climate emergency, they set up a resident-led commission of what ended up to be 13 people, local people, to help work with the climate change unit, the climate emergency unit in the council. And it was quite a broad range of people, including a young student from the borough and a number of others who volunteered, basically. That was all done through 2020, and we came up with a report which Andy's got sitting on his knee, part of it, I think, the report from the Climate and Ecological Emergency Commission. And that helped to feed into the plans that Hinesh is talking about. We did lots of kind of meeting with people and really had lots of ideas, some of them pretty crazy, probably, about what we could do in the borough, some of them very practical. We landed it all with Hinesh and his team, and many of them have turned up in the plan that has now been published for what's going to happen between now and 2030. The crucial thing is that we did that during the pandemic, so we were meeting virtually. We didn't have much opportunity for big public meetings or events, and I think the most important thing really is for all of us to engage with what you're doing, Hinesh, and what's happening in the council, and push forward our ideas and our anxieties and our hopes for what is going to happen over the next 10 years. Because actually it's not all about, you know, stopping people doing this, that and the other thing. It's about making Hammersmith and Fulham a much better, healthier place to live, and particularly dealing with the fact that it's poorer people, it's people in social housing, it's people who don't have much already who are going to suffer most when the effects of the climate emergency hit us, as they're already starting to do. Look at the flooding.
Thanks, Pat. Okay. Oh, we have another question. Thank you.
Just wondering how much the panel believes that food and food choices are affecting climate change. Do you have control over what is served in schools? For example, in St John's Wood, a school has gone completely vegan because of the horse meat scandal and the complexity of dealing with halal and non-halal. Are you going to do anything about perhaps encouraging soya meat and meat alternatives? And are you aware of the forest fire? Look at In God's Name, Do Something, sort of the whole of Africa is burning. And are you aware of this catastrophic influence on our environment that has been kept suppressed by big food and the media?
Thank you very much for the question. Who would like to answer that? Hinesh, would you like to go first?
Yeah,
in terms of the council's perspective on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and I'd love to know more about that particular school if they've gone fully vegan. That's brilliant. So school meals and the food served in school is quite a complex area, as I've come to learn over the last few months. We're looking at how we can change, not necessarily change food choices, but provide more options and give people the choice and bring people with us on that journey to reduce our food-based emissions. They make up quite a big proportion of the emissions, of our personal emissions. We are working at the moment on a food strategy for the council and all of the food that we're responsible for. We're not necessarily responsible for all of the food in every school, because a lot of schools are academies and therefore they're responsible for their own. So we've got a lot of engagement work to do with schools, especially those that are beyond our control, but we've got a lot of work to do to engage parents and children as well on the impacts of the food we consume, and try and bring them on that journey with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
certainly interesting. Congratulations to the Council and setting up the climate unit. What's going to be the impact of this in terms of spending? Have you costed this in terms of the impact on council taxpayers?
Thank you very much for the question. Did you hear it, Hinesh?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I think I got most of that. So we published our strategy last month, and the strategy is quite a high-level strategy, so it's not costed in detail. We have an estimated cost of what it would, of what sort of funding would be required to decarbonise a whole borough like Hammersmith and Fulham, and it's not necessarily a cost that comes back to residents through council tax. It's funding that is that we've got to seek from many different sources, particularly central government funding, probably international funds as well. So it's quite a large figure. I think other boroughs have we've used estimates from elsewhere, and we think it will be, you know, in the several billions, because the majority of that is decarbonising our homes and buildings, and that costs a lot of money. That doesn't necessarily mean it will come back to you in council tax bills.
Sorry, Timothy, just sorry, if you could wait for the mic. Thank you.
Don't really use your mic, but I will do. I think that's all well and good, but like with all these strategies, and it's a difficult situation for also the central government.
Sorry, yeah, so it's for the live stream community.
Okay, very well. Can everybody hear me now?
It's for the live stream community, so
Okay,
if
people can hear me a bit better now.
Yes,
it's obviously got to be a strategy that is affordable, and it's difficult because, yes, we're going to have to make great investment in decarbonising. However, it shouldn't. I think it's important that the strategy does not adversely impact people who are extremely poor and on the edge now, who are marginalised. And councils don't have a very good record of getting their budgets right, particularly in London. We notice tend to be very bad. So I don't want it to go to a political strategy. I want it to be an effective strategy that actually really helps people, that the money doesn't get lost in bureaucracy, endless meetings, the usual thing it goes. I mean, I've seen this in the BBC over many years. I know how these things go. So you're talking about several billions, but how are you going to try and put this to a referendum to the borough residents? How are you going to try and convince the residents of the borough that this is a worthwhile strategy to pursue?
I think that's a very good question. I mean, Pat, I see you leaning forward.
Well, yeah, I do have some comments on your question, though obviously I'm not from the council, so I've got nothing to do with council budgeting. But I think one thing that people need to remember is that the next 10 years we're going to be spending a lot of money anyway. For example, I live on an estate that has communal heating, and our boilers are coming to the end of their life, so they will have to be replaced. It's not a council estate. It was built by the GLC, but it's an estate of residents and leaseholders and tenants. I've got no idea how we are going to find the money to replace the communal gas boilers, which we certainly shouldn't be replacing as communal gas boilers. You know, so somewhere the money to help us to change from a very unsustainable form of heating our estate has to be found to help us pay for. Obviously, we've got to carry on paying for the energy we use, but we need to find a way of having a much better infrastructure for our little estate of 80 flats or so. And I think it's the same for council properties. They all need maintaining. They need windows changing. They need, infrastructure needs to be maintained. We should absolutely make sure that whenever we're doing that, it's being done with the climate emergency in mind, so that we're thinking about the fact that people need to be able to keep cool in the summer, that the temperatures are going to be, even more uncomfortable than they have been in recent years. We need to think about how estates and our streets and so on are going to cope with flooding and so on. It's not like there is no money going to be spent and suddenly we're going to spend all this money on this new idea. Actually, a great deal of it has to be spent anyway. It's just about where we direct the funding. And absolutely, Hinesh, I agree. It's also about where we get support from to do that.
No, I certainly would agree with you. Years and years ago, much to something I did not wish to do on a personal level. because I had to replace my gas boiler with another gas boiler. I very much looked in those days at ground source heat pumps as well as air source heat pumps, but even now the cost is still prohibitive at say £10,000 to £12,000 for an air source heat pump. And the trouble with that is that runs off electricity, and the current way the burden is in terms of certain green taxes on electricity as opposed to, say, the price per therm on gas. It's difficult, so it's still, it's still not terribly affordable for even people who are well off at that level. So let alone people who are on the edge and have absolutely no money, and they're pushed into poverty, and even more so with the prospect of a possible £400 hike in gas coming up to April with the change there. I mean, they've had, for example, ground source heat pumps in Scandinavia for donkey's years, since the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that, and I'm very grateful for your reply.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a few questions. So if we can take this lady over here first, please. Thank you.
I'm cribbing. I'm doing more cribbing. Yeah.
My name is Elizabeth Kawonza. I just wanted to ask a question and to raise some concern with the number of high-rise buildings that are erupting within the borough. My daughter lives near Westfield, and recently I was told that there's the 30-story building that is being constructed right there. The traffic congestion around the Shepherd's Bush area is atrocious. And the number of incidences of children with asthma and so on, I think, speak for themselves within the borough. And given that there's a lot of evidence to demonstrate that these high-rise buildings impact on the environment as well as on climate change, why is Hammersmith and Fulham still allowing such buildings to carry on being erected? You just have to look across on Duquesne Road, on Wood Lane, at the other end, at Imperial College, there's another very big building. Now, there's yet another one that's going to be built. The amount of traffic that comes to Westfield, I'm not sure what the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham, how much they benefit from all this traffic that's coming in and out. Do we get a stipend from all the businesses that are there? Are they going to mitigate the impact of all this pollution from all the cars going around there? And what are the plans in the future to calm the traffic, especially around the green? Because at the moment it's really, really unsafe. You just have to go there, sit there for maybe half an hour, and you can see black things on your, if you are wearing something white. It's very concerning.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And just at this point, I'm just going to take 2 more questions so we can make sure that we're having as many voices heard as possible, and then we'll come to the panel to respond to the questions. Thank you.
This follows from the question, I think, about the council tax, or perhaps complements it, that one of the main criticisms of the purported aim to reduce the emissions of any particular area is that it relies on global inequality, that it can simply redistribute or relocate the activities or industries responsible for it to other countries. So how, I'm not entirely sure about this case, but how are you going to ensure that the costs of these changes are going to be confined to this area as well as distributed to those in it with the greatest means to change?
Thank you very much. Hayden, correct? And the gentleman just behind you, I think, yes. Thank you.
Hello. Following on from Elizabeth's question, we have one submitted in advance. What can be done to improve the terrible air quality in our borough?
Thank you very, very much. So if we start with the air quality question, that would be fantastic. It just links to that question that was submitted in advance. So if the panel could please respond to Elizabeth's point about the quality of air, the problems with congestion, high-rise buildings within the borough, that would be fantastic. So who would like to start? Andy, if we come to you. Thank you.
Very happy to. I might just comment on one of the earlier questions as well, if I may. But on air quality, last week I went to visit Professor Frank Kelly, who is probably the preeminent scientist dealing with air quality, and who is based about 10 minutes walk from here at Imperial. And it's his work over the past 20 years which has really identified the degree of the problem in London. He represents most of the London boroughs use his unit to monitor, in terms of monitoring their air quality. This isn't a new problem. I can remember when I was first elected to the council, which is more than 30 years ago, we had serious concerns then, particularly about schools, particularly about the major trunk roads, and it's just got worse over that period of time. And it's only now that we're really looking at measures to address that. And you've seen some of the developments recently in which, both in the courts, where there was a groundbreaking case in relation to Salia, a child who died, and that was ascribed to living on the South Circular Road, that finally we seem to be taking this as seriously as we need to. The problem, and you know, these things are controversial, because if you look at the ULEZ, the ultra-low emission zone that the mayor's introduced, or other steps that he's taken to try and reduce congestion and reduce polluting vehicles, or indeed what the council here has done in terms of raising parking amounts, or what it's done in terms of cycle lanes and things of that kind. I get a lot of correspondence, and it comes from both sides on these issues. So these are not decisions that are easy to take, but because they're not easy to take, we've left them too long, and now we're facing a much worse crisis. It's not that. I mean, if you had Frank Kelly, you know, that he would tell you that they know what to do, and they know what the problems are, and they're looking at the next generation problems, which is air quality inside dwellings. There are severe issues to do with the air quality inside. I think most people think if you're not on the A4 or the A40, if you're inside your own flat or house, then you're safe. And in fact, in many cases, the opposite is the case. So it's partly education, but it is also partly action, and that does mean spending money. So I mean, to turn the gentleman from earlier's question around slightly, we have the third lowest council tax in the country here, and although there is pressure on council tax from other areas like social care and so on, I think actually the bigger problem here is that if we are asking, as Father Richard said at the very beginning of the meeting, people to make changes and sacrifices in their own lives, they have to see that government at all levels, I mean national and local, are serious about this as well. And that does mean changing the way that things are run. That does mean investing quite large sums of money over the next few years to do that. And that's partly because we've neglected that. And finally, I'll just find it, I don't want to go too long. I've got huge concerns about tall buildings, and environmental and air quality is only one of them. They're built on an inhuman scale. They're not the buildings we need. They're mostly luxury flats. They're not really building for the local population here. Actually, Hammersmith now is being far more critical, because there's such a time lag. You get your planning consents, and as long as you put one brick in the ground within 5 years, you can preserve that usually. Most of the buildings you're seeing going up now were given permission with very little controls and very little affordable housing. And affordable housing is important because poorer people don't emit so much carbon, putting it crudely in that way. They're not the people who have 2 SUVs running around. So we are actually dealing with the consequences of decisions that were made 10 years ago now. And I hope that we're seeing, there's pressure from Westfield to build a 46-storey block. If you go, actually, Kensington and Ealing are worse. North Acton, if you've seen that, 55-storey blocks being built there. A really horrifically poorly thought out townscape. Kensington are about to do the same thing as well. Hammersmith has just managed to negotiate with the developer for the opposite what I call the poor man's Shard, the Imperial 35-storey. On the back of that, of course, we get they proliferate. A developer was trying to build I think it's about a 29-storey block immediately opposite that, and that's been negotiated down so far to 18 stories. That may not be ideal, but certainly I get the impression from talking, as I was today, to the cabinet member responsible at Hammersmith, they are aware of this, and they need to build the right type of housing, and that includes on the right scale.
Thank you, Andy. So in terms of the question that we also had from Hayden, in terms of the costs and ensuring that costs are or the focus of investments really coming into the borough and are focused on making improvements within the borough and the local community. Inesh, is there anything you would like to say in response to Hayden?
Yeah, so just following on from some of what Andy said, I think we also need to think about the regulations that we place on a lot of these buildings if they are going to get approved. Hopefully we negotiate with them and maybe reduce the scope of them or whatever, but the other element is putting in the regulations to deal with the emissions, the traffic, the other social issues and whatever comes with them, so we can mitigate the impact of some of these developments. In terms of the money that comes from them, there is possibly some benefit from some of those developments because it contributes to it contributes to council funding and things like that, and it helps keep council tax low, but it does have those negative externalities, those negative effects that some of the questions have been talking about. So I don't know if I've answered the question, but maybe not.
Thank you very much. Pat?
If we're going to talk about air quality, surely we have to talk about cars and how we get around our borough and through it. You know, who drives in the borough, who needs to drive in the borough, how public transport works in the borough so that people don't have the need necessarily to drive quite so much. How I think an enormous amount of traffic that goes through our borough is actually going through our borough. It's going from somewhere out there to somewhere in there. And we are bearing the emissions that creates. So that's about really good, public transport that people really want to use and can use. And it's about making it easier for us to get around our own borough, or within 2 or 3 miles of where we live, without having to get in a car if you're lucky enough to own a car. And actually most people in the borough don't even own a car. So when we worry about the car lobby and so on having such power, I don't understand why they have such power. Most people in Hammersmith and Fulham don't have a car. How do they get around? On the bus, maybe on the tube if they're going into work. They walk, they cycle, they push their buggy, they maybe get on their scooter. They they roll along on their wheelchair. We should be worrying about how those people get around the borough and making a lot more space that we've got here amenable to those people. And I'm afraid that means taking away some of the space from the cars. And that's what I'd like to see by 2030, actually, is it's an enormous amount of the space that we currently give over to cars, most of them parked for most of the time, being actually used by people to cycle, walk, sit, meet their friends, have a coffee, have a picnic, look at the birds. That's what I'd like to see. I have a car. I confess I have a car. I try not to use it too often. I also cycle and walk. I want public transport to be so good that I don't need my car.
Thanks, Pat. And Philippa, this is, of course, a real area of focus for you. So, in your capacity and your role within the council, would you like to share some reflections and perhaps a bit more about what the council is doing to tackle this too?
Yeah, so there are plans for much more cycling infrastructure. And I can't go into a huge amount of detail, not because I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail, but because I'm still learning about it. So I've been in post for just under 2 weeks, and I'm still really picking up an enormous amount. But one of the key aspects of my job is behaviour change. I actually got rid of our car 8 years ago. And at times it's been inconvenient, not so much for local journeys, but for going out of town. And that's because, there hasn't been great public transport to go out into rural areas and really enjoy so much of what this beautiful island that we live on can give us. So there have been inconveniences. I agree with Pat. Less than 40% of residents in Hammersmith and Fulham own a car. And yet you'd think that it was kind of like 100%, really. And I do think that needs to change. I do want to see us as a council speaking much more to people who are walking and cycling already, people who are getting around in wheelchairs, people who aren't pushing their children in buggies. You know, I know what it feels like to cycle on the roads in Hammersmith and Fulham. I've always cycled on the roads in Hammersmith and Fulham. I have a son who is now 18, and you know, he was brought up cycling, but actually he didn't start cycling on his own until he was probably about 16 and a half or 17, because as a mother who is a regular cyclist, who's actually a cycling instructor, I didn't feel that the roads were safe, and I didn't feel they were safe because they're not safe. So, you know, the council is offering free cycle training to school children and to adults. It's available to people who live, work and study. You've taken it?
I've had it. I have.
Fantastic.
Anything free.
It's free.
Yeah.
Because we would like to see people enabled to ride bicycles. They are a great way to get around. They're free, they are liberating, they enhance your mood, they are cheaper than running a car. And, you know, we want to see people feeling that they don't have to drive down to the shop to get a newspaper or to buy a pint of milk. That, you know, as parents don't have to drive to school to drop their children off and to come back. That's what we want to see. You know, I hope it's not going to take until 2030 to see those changes. I hope we're going to be seeing changes within months and, you know, even just a year. That's my wish, so that's what I'm working for.
Thank you very much. And before we take more questions from the floor, we actually have a video to show featuring members of the local community talking about the concerns they have about climate change and the action they would like to see taken. So I think it's a really good point just to hear from members of the community at this point, and then we'll come back for questions from the floor.
Do you want us to
Yeah.
What worries you about climate change?
What worries me about climate change is that people do not know enough about it. That people are walking around thinking that perhaps it's someone else's problem. This is not everyone, but I truly believe that we need to have a shared understanding and have shared responsibility in making a difference for this planet if we want to ensure that future generations have somewhere to live, grow, and create something amazing and special.
The environment is completely polluted and it's very, very worrying.
Our climate is really dying, and this is because of us, human, what you have done to the climate.
High temperatures, yes, and
what worries everyone else really, just the state of our planet, what God gave us and what we've done to it really, and for the next generations to come.
We are throwing plastics, we are using so many things we shouldn't be using.
Disaster which we never expected, which could happen anytime.
The way the world is moving is heading towards disaster.
So somebody big, I cannot compare a human being to compare with the world like that.
Well, I'm worried about our children's future.
If we treat our world too bad, we could maybe not even live in the earth anymore, and that would be very bad for us and the creatures on the earth. So I think we have to treat the world like a better place.
We're going to lose animals, lose beautiful natural beauties of land. Stuff like the rainforests, the raising sea levels, we'll lose stuff. It'd be like in the archive histories, we'll see our grandkids and our great-grandkids can only talk about what we saw. Do something.
I have a child who's special needs, and that's enough to worry about, other than now worrying about the world that's going to be around for him.
For me as a parent, I worry that she won't be able to live in the world that we live in now, that lots of things are going to change, she won't be able to enjoy even going to the forest, going for a swim in the lake, that's all going to change for her.
What are the big and bold changes we can make to prevent climate change?
Oh wow, I mean there's so much that needs to be done.
What changes can we do to prevent climate change? I believe there are very simple steps we can all take to prevent climate change. So, I mean, we've heard Father Richard talk about this already. Switching energy providers, thinking about cycling instead of taking a car to work or to travel in general. But genuinely, I believe the true change will come when we start changing the systems that we're living in that facilitate the climate crisis. So this is all about our leaders taking active preventative steps, dismantling the systems that are existing right now that are contributing to this crisis in order for us to all have to make a collective change to make a difference.
Our clothes, we should do something with them, recycle. People are not recycling. There are a lot of people wasting food, even though we are claiming poverty, but a lot of food waste. And that's not good for the climate, and that's not good for us.
On my part, I play my part by walking to work, spend more time walking rather than going by public transport or driving most of the time.
Small changes in our household, so save the lights, switch them off whenever you leave the room, right? Save water, don't shower for half an hour. Little things that if we all do them, it's going to make a massive difference.
Could be little things as well, like not driving everywhere, get on a bike when you can, walking. Yeah, there's small little things we can do, and we all collectively do it. I think it will build up.
The people need to change the way we use energy, right? Because energy is not clean, and people waste energy, and that needs to change.
I think people should walk to school, walk to get to their workplaces. That's number one thing I think we should do. And another thing is stop buying plastic waters. Boil your water if you can.
On my part, any light that is not being used, I switch it off.
And I think you should be using less plastic.
Let's reduce burning natural fibres.
Because if you don't have the earth, then you use the money for anyway.
It has to trickle down from the top because the changes are going to have a cost effect. So the governments, the people who believe that we are the people, that they want us on board, they have to start making changes to help us to not use plastic, to not manufacture plastics, to make it a safer and better world. It's just an all-round education and funding. I think that what initially has to happen, it's not going to happen for free. Governments need to support communities, communities need to support families, because we've been so used to the way that we live with plastics, with everything else, that the education of change needs to come in. We just need to all support each other as a world family. We need the help and we need the funding, and the planet is crying out for us all to listen and to help.
Back we go.
Thank you. I think that was an incredible video, some really helpful suggestions and perspectives shared. And just in terms of a question we've already received in advance that links really nicely to this video, I'm coming to you, Philippa and Pat. I mean, I think there's this broad agreement that in the fight against climate change, there's all sorts that we need to do in terms of radically changing our everyday habits, our patterns of behavior, and our lifestyle choices, you know, reducing weight, cutting air travel, all the things that we heard about in the video. So I suppose, how can people be persuaded to make these changes in their behavior?
Should I go first?
Yes, please.
Well, I think it's really hard to make people, to encourage people to make changes in their behaviour. I think it's essential, but I think it's not enough. I mean, if we all here decided that we won't go on the next flight we were planning, how much difference is that going to make? How many people here are actually planning a flight? I mean, you know, most of the flights that are taken by less than 10% of the population, and especially most of the multiple flights are taken by a very small proportion of the population. So, you know, we can, yes, of course we should reduce, at least reduce, if not cut out, I haven't cut it out yet, reduce the amount of meat we eat, reduce the amount of dairy, because we know what the impacts of that are on a big scale. And so reducing that is a good idea. Of course, you know, I don't need to buy new clothes. I've got plenty of clothes. And actually, you know, COVID and staying home a lot has shown many of us that we don't need quite as much as we thought we needed, which is great. But all that kind of cutting down, not going out, not doing things, didn't actually make an enormous amount of difference. For a while, the air was cleaner. For a while, things were quieter. For a while, people said they could hear the birds singing. But actually, it's pretty much gone back to normal, hasn't it? And people are, you don't feel like that anymore. And the actual impact that COVID had on a global scale in terms of cutting our emissions was actually very small, and nothing like the amount we need to cut our global emissions on an annual basis anyway. It didn't even manage to do that for 1 year. So although I think that it's really good for people to make individual choices and, you know, cut down plastic, don't buy bottled water, think about your food, don't buy so many clothes, hopefully give up your car, or at least, you know, maybe try and share your car. Some people do need a car, you know, but think about really whether you need it and what your impact is. But there are big changes that have to be made that are going to make the actual difference. And if we're all trying on our own to do those things, that's great. And you know, we can turn around and look our kids in the eye if we're doing that and say, we really tried, I did try to do that. But the big things have to be done at a much bigger scale and a much bigger level. And that's why actually it's what we do politically, what noise we make, what we say to the people that we elect, you know, whether they have power or not, and what we buy, what we spend our money on. You know, we're consumers, so we need to think about what we're buying and who we're buying it from. And on that point, I think somebody raised the issue earlier about, you know, cutting down things here, but having an impact elsewhere because things get made somewhere else or are brought from somewhere else. So yes, we should think about buying local, being much more local, not exporting all the things, you know, not getting all our clothes from cheap manufacturers elsewhere in the world, clothes that are designed to be, you know, to be worn 5 times, for example. That's one example. Such big things need to be done. It helps with a personal sense of responsibility and that you're doing something to do the small things, and let's all do them. But actually, it's not going to be enough.
Thank you, Pat. Philippa, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I hear exactly what Pat is saying. There needs to be systemic change. There's no question about that. I do think, though, there needs to be hope, rather, because otherwise we can all fall into this, you know, spiral of despair and think, well, there's no point in doing anything because there's no systemic change, and so we're all doomed. And I think, you know, many of us who care about this issue probably go through that phase. I certainly went through it for a long time of thinking, oh my gosh, I mean, there's just no hope. It's just all absolutely desperate. There is hope. And, you know, the hope is actually following your heart and doing something. If you care about this issue, there's a movement called degrowth. Why do we need to buy 3 things because they're being sold for the price of 2? Just buy one of them. You know, why do we need to buy a new wardrobe for every single season? It really doesn't, you know, I mean, if we think about the impact that that's having on, you know, sort of just cotton growing and on just the appalling environmental impact. Yes, the fact that we individually decide that we're going to be, you know, spending our money through charity shops rather than spending it through, you know, sort of Primark or H&M, it might have the impact of a bee sting, but a bee sting still hurts. And so I think that actually individual action is really, really important. And I have found enormous hope in changing some of my own behaviours, like, for instance, giving up the car. That it just made me feel empowered. It really did. I can do it. Giving up meat, we haven't given up dairy, but giving up meat. Just little things like that make you feel that, there is something that you can do. There is something that you can say. And yeah, I hope that makes some sense.
Yes, thank you very, very much. And so, questions are open from the floor. We do have a question from Rebecca Abbott, who is joining us online, so I do want to ensure we ask that question too. So let's take a few from the floor. Oh, if you wait for the mic, and then that'd be great, so the online community can hear as well. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hi.
I feel, as I love gardening, and I don't have a garden, but I have a backyard, and I try and make it as green as possible. And I find it very upsetting that people have paved over their front gardens to park their cars. And that is a really bad impact on the environment, because the water has got to go somewhere. It's a danger for flooding and everything else. And I think basically we need money. Well, personally, I think they ought to have to be fined if they do something like that, and it should be reversed. I don't think these car parks should be there instead of a front garden. I think the front garden should be come back and green the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That actually links really nicely to Rebecca Abbott's question, which is, what is Hammersmith and Fulham doing, and should be doing more of, in its capacity as a local flood authority under the Flood and Water Management Act of 2010 to reduce the risk of flash and surface water flooding and sewer flooding in the borough? So thank you very much for sharing that comment, and we'll come to that question, Rebecca. So if we can just take two more questions, please. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was in the council chamber in July 2019, along with probably quite a few people in this room, when the council declared a climate and ecological emergency. And it was a really exciting moment, because it did seem like, the council, along with many other councils in the country, were really listening to the science, which was telling us in no uncertain terms that we needed to make radical transformations the way we operate in society, particularly in the rich economies like ours. But I must admit that 2 years later, I'm not feeling quite so excited. I know we've had COVID. That's been a massive disruption and distraction. But nonetheless, it is, to be honest, a bit disappointing, especially when I see almost every day in the news stories from other cities and even other boroughs in London that are taking the kind of radical moves, putting policies in place, changing the way that their cities are designed and the way that people travel. I'm thinking of Paris, of Barcelona, of Birmingham this week, announcing that it's basically going to close its centre to cars imminently. Berlin looks like it's going down that road as well. And meanwhile, what are we doing with adding a little bit extra to visitors' parking charges? It just feels so slow and so timid. And to give you an example of the way that car dominance just has not been addressed in our borough, I think the council issues, I think, between 30 and 35,000 residents' parking permits every year. And to apply for one, there's no waiting list. It's an unquestionable right. You pay £119, you get your permit. But if you want to park your bicycle securely on the street, then there are precisely 240 spaces in the entire borough to do that. There's a massive waiting list of 1,378 people for those 240 spaces. So good luck if you're on that waiting list. It may be some time. That, to me, does not speak of a borough that is really committed to transitioning from car culture to active travel. So I guess that's your department, Philippa. I'm sure you're going to be on that. But that's a shocking statistic to me. And I just one other thing. Can I mention on the same lines, Hammersmith Bridge? You can probably see a picture in the corner of a reimagined Hammersmith Bridge. There are a lot of people who believe that the closure of Hammersmith Bridge, which was obviously dramatic and sudden and unplanned and very inconvenient for a lot of people, and has been a wretched saga for many years, as we all know. But it is also a precious opportunity to do something creative and reimagine that bridge, which was never built for cars, and to really show some leadership and get people excited about the green future that we all know that we need to embrace. But again, I'm just not hearing anything. Literally, I'm not hearing anything, because I presented a letter to Stephen Cowan a year ago, an open letter signed by 15 different organizations calling for a car-free solution to that particular problem, and no response. So I'd like to hear if the panel have got any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and so just one more question, and I am conscious of the time for everyone. I know everyone would want to get their points across and have a say, so yes, if we could keep our questions as succinct as possible. Thank you.
I believe climate change goes with change of behavior, attitude, and I can see around our community here in White City, a lot of work has been done reminding people to recycle. And nearly under each building in this area now, I can see areas where people need to recycle, put things. But at the same time, are you doing something to continue to remind people? Because children learn quickly and do things quickly. This is we're talking about adults. We've been living in society of consummation, throwing things every time. And I think as a community and council, it would be good to offer a constant reminder, offer people to learn more about recycling, because this for other people can be another culture. And few years ago, before the pandemic, Father Richard was reminding us, we went to visit where they do recycling, all that to remind people, to help us, to know, to teach us. So what the council are doing, especially here in this area of White City, to remind people to change their behavior, their attitude to recycle, and the way they waste things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Susan. Okay, so if we can start with the question or comment posed by Avid Gardner and the question from Rebecca around what Hammersmith and Fulham is doing to reduce the risk of flash and surface water flooding. That would be fantastic. Hinesh, shall we come to you first?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, there's been lots of flooding in the borough recently, and many of you may have been affected by it, and sadly it's probably going to increase over the next few years, because that is one of the impacts of climate change. Surface water flooding is quite difficult to control in an urban environment, because what we've done over decades is put a lot of services under our roads, under our streets. So what we're trying to do where we can is look at sustainable drainage systems, and we have lots of examples. I think we've got quite a few in this area as well, to try and soak up some of that surface water rainfall, that excess rainfall. And we're looking at other ways of managing our sewage systems as well. I like your point about trying to encourage people, or maybe even force people to convert their paved driveways back to green spaces and spaces that we can allow our biodiversity to thrive as well. It'd be really good if we can enable all of that to happen. And just to go back to some of those points about some of the individual actions we can take, I think our role at all levels of government is to try and make a lot of that easier and cheaper as well. So we're looking at some of the ways we can do that. In particular, your point, we have been discussing how we can do that.
Thank you very much, Hinesh. I'm just sort of thinking, because, I mean, sir, I didn't catch your name, unfortunately. Will. Thank you very much for your point. And I'm just sort of sitting here thinking, I don't want anyone to feel disappointed and have that sense that the borough is not committed to tackling the climate crisis and becoming carbon neutral by 2030. I don't want that at all, you know, and it just really strikes a chord right here. And I'm just wondering, Andy, if you want to come in and talk about, you know, the borough's commitment, some of the things that, yes, we are seeing in other countries, but things that are happening within our community.
Yeah. I mean, I'll try not to go on too long because there's a huge amount of issues that have just come up, and I don't speak for the council, but obviously I do work closely with them. And I mean, to take the point, I mean, I was very encouraged by what Pat and Philip said earlier on about individual initiative and that it can make a difference. And of course, people who come to this meeting and the people who are watching it, and quite a lot of other people in the borough, will do that. But for a lot of other people, if they don't see government, whether it's local or national government, putting their money where their mouth is, as it were, it's our money after all, and taking the initiative on some of these issues and really being quite clear, then there isn't that incentive. So we're not going to, I think, break through unless, despite everything that everyone is doing individually, unless we have that as well. And I'm sure that Hammersmith, along with other authorities, can be criticised, and certainly the government can be criticised. I mean, in fairness to the government, I looked at what they said were their achievements before I came here, and they were things like they're things like net zero by 2050. Well, we all know that's far too late. In the same way that 2% global warming is far too much. And so both internationally, and of course we've got COP26, and nationally, we're not ambitious enough, and we're not even trying to deliver those targets. I mean, another issue is we will end direct government support for the fossil fuel energy sector overseas. Well, that's good, but they're thinking about opening a new coal mine in Cumbria and a new oil field off Shetland. So it's quite difficult to ask people to make their own contribution if they see government not really trying to do what they need to do. Now, I think flooding, I'm dealing at the moment with several hundred residents whose homes flooded on the 12th of July, and they were largely the same people whose homes flooded 14 years ago. And the only thing that's changed since then is that Thames Water has been taken over by 3 or 4 different international consortium and have paid out hundreds of millions to their directors since then, but they never invested in the SUD schemes, in the pumps, or in the major flood alleviation scheme that they were supposed to do. So again, it's quite difficult to turn around and say to somebody, well, oh, you've got your garden paved, when the statutory bodies that should be dealing with this on a much wider scale haven't done it. We do have some good SUD. The council has done some good SUD schemes, including on the state. There has to be, everybody has to be sincere in what they're doing and has to actually have what I hope are realistic, but what are challenging targets. It's why I think actually the borough's target, and it's also the Labour Party target of 2030, is the right target to have. 1.5 degrees is the worst we should be looking at, not 2 degrees. And I don't want to prejudge what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen at COP26, but we haven't made anything like the progress since Paris that we should have made. So I accept a lot of the criticisms that have been made. I think actually local authorities on the whole are trying a bit harder than national governments are to do this. And part of the problem there is that most of the funding, local government is cash strapped at the moment. I watched both party conferences with interest to see what was being promised. There were pretty few promises that came out on this or any other issues. Now, whether that's because we're in this uncertain post-COVID phase and a lot of public money has already been spent and people are resigned, but the one central and clear promise that did come out of the Labour Party conference was to spend 48 billion a year for 8 years specifically on ensuring that we could reach that 2030 target. And that is, I think, given the difficulty of finding those sort of sums of money, that does show the sort of investment on the right sort of scale that you need to do, and that can be anything from cycling infrastructure to home insulation to new industries for wind turbines and things of that kind. That's the sort of thing, I think, if the public was seeing that happening and government leading on that, and local government being incentivised to do that as well, many more people than Philippa and Pat would be prepared to say, well, I will now make the effort myself in terms of, you know, what can be quite difficult changes in my lifestyle.
Can I just very briefly say, Wilf, that I totally hear your frustration. I know exactly where it's coming from. And one of the things that really surprised me when I started working in the council is actually how many other people feel that frustration too. There is a real desire within the council to see change. And I really hope, you know, I've been brought in kind of, I suppose, because of the expertise that I have in cycle training and the cycling world, to really try and affect some of that change. It's not with infrastructure, it's with behaviour change. And, you know, it has just been actually quite refreshingly surprising to go into the council and find that there is, you know, there are a lot of people who are feeling like this. And there are moves. And I mean, your department, for instance, you know, the strategies that are coming out of Hinesh's department, I think you're going to see that filtering down. I totally understand. You're not seeing the cycle paths being laid down. You're not seeing the changes. Totally get that. And I also hear, you know, the frustration that, you know, because I see it on the WhatsApp chats, you know, well, a month ago you were saying that we're going to be seeing the cycling infrastructure coming in. A few weeks ago you were saying that we were going to be seeing this change and that change. Yeah, that's right. And I just hope that we will actually be seeing it coming in, because I know that from within the council there is a desire to see that change happen.
Thank you all very much. I did mention at the beginning we have 2 videos, so there is another video from St. John the 23rd Primary School. I'm going to rely on the wonderful tech team to help put this video on. It's going to be introduced by Mr. Booth from the school.
Off we go. Gonna fall down here in a
Hi, thank you very much for having us this evening. I've come on a slightly different angle from the other people who are sat here and very knowledgeable about what's going on. First of all, to introduce myself on behalf of the school and the children and the staff at the school, and try and make links within the community. But secondly, to ask for help from all of you in our challenge sort of this year and ongoing with what we're trying to do. We've talked a lot about there has to be huge change from the government and down, but in a not to be too negative kind of way, we aren't going to be here forever, and the children that are in our school are perhaps one day going to have your jobs, and they're the children that are going to be sat here talking to people. And if we can get into them early enough and talk to them about their small decisions, their small choices, they will be the people that make change later on. So I spoke to Father Richard earlier on this week or this term, and I said we're starting this group of climate leaders within our school, and we'd like to do a bit of work within the community. Father Richard jumped at a chance, and then we pulled the children together, and they were frighteningly enthusiastic for change. I was hoping for perhaps we'll put recycling bins in the classrooms, easy job, finished by 3:30. It turns out we had some militant environmentalists, perhaps might be the word, within our school who have huge ideas for change, ideas that are beyond my remit, are beyond the school's remit, but they're talking about, as a lady down here was asking about, we're talking about can we get the canteen to be meat free on perhaps just a Friday to start with. We are talking about during November, can we make a start and perhaps all staff, which didn't go down too well, but all parents on a Friday will walk to school. And if we start like this on a Friday, would that work? Could we get someone at the end of the road on a Friday to block it off so people can't bring their cars down maybe once a week, and we'll try this kind of thing? But I don't know is the long and the short of it. I don't know how big we can make this. I don't know how small this could start. So what I would like to do is ask for any help from anybody in the community. If you have ideas, come in and speak to the children. They can only be what they see in front of them, and if you are in front of them giving them that idea, you could be the spark that ignites the flame within inside them that changes their life and puts them on a path that ends up with them making huge decisions like you do every day. And I've also come down to nail you lot down to see if you will come into school and speak to them, because it makes my job a little bit easier if someone else does the talking and I can sit at the back doing the nodding. Would be great. But we want to do things about walking to school on Friday. That would be brilliant. We want to know how we can make our school net carbon zero. We want to see what happens in local community and how we can do that. And we want to see how our voices can make a change in the community that we're in. So, as I say at the end of every meeting, I'll be stood at the back there at the end, and if you want to come and give me your email address, we can sort something out. But I hope you'll see from this short video that we made that the children in our school are hugely serious about this change. They're really, really passionate, and you'll also have to excuse their expressions. They were enjoying themselves, but we only had a really short amount of time to get this done. So they are having a good time, they just don't look it.
It's time to make a change. As young people, we will inherit the earth, and we want to make sure that it's still an earth that we can live on and enjoy.
The damage to the planet can be seen globally, but also in our community.
We need to work together.
We all have concerns.
Plastic is being used too much and polluting our local environment.
The poorest people in the world are getting affected by us.
Animals are becoming extinct.
The world we were created to care for is being destroyed. But we also have a plan. We can't sit and wait for people to make the change for us. We aim to be the difference in our community and bring others with us.
We aim to reduce the amount of plastic that we use in our homes and schools. We aim to change the way we travel to school to make it greener.
We aim to recycle correctly more of our school waste.
We aim to make sustainable choices in our own lives.
We aim to put others first. We aim to reduce the amount of paper in our school drastically. We aim to think about how our food choices affect the planet.
We also need your help. We need members of our community to help us in our mission.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring.
Wow, absolutely incredible. Also honoured to be a governor of St. John the 23rd. Absolutely amazing, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Booth. Okay, so. Wow, I think it's been rather, an emotive, passionate, fantastic evening. I mean, unless there are any final questions. Okay, we do, okay, of course we do, because we will never stop this discussion around climate change. So if we can squeeze in a final 2 questions, okay, so yes, one here, so we just need the mic. If you, one here and then one at the front, if that's okay. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Parish. I just want to ask if the council has any future or further plans to grow more trees and to encourage individuals from practicing back garden agriculture.
Thank you very much, Pius. And one at the front. Oh, okay, so Father Richard has spoken. We're having 3 questions. Thank you very much. Hilda?
Yeah, just to say, following on from the children's film, I'm actually looking forward to going into the school on Wednesday. I'm going to do an assembly with them on behalf of CAFOD, which is the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development. And while I've got Andrew here, I want to put a few points about that. We've actually spent some time thinking about our actions and what we can do in climate change. And we know that in our community, the poorest people will be affected most. In our world, the poorest people will be affected most. But there are a few things that we can actually do in order to influence our government and the governments of the rich countries to help the people in the poor countries. Because, as the children quite often say, there is no planet B. We can't take action on our own. We need people in the poorest countries to take action. And the same way that we worry about, can we afford to take the action? How much is it going to cost us? No, we can say, well, actually, we can't afford not to take the action. But in poor countries, they can't afford to take the action that's needed either. So I want to talk about, if Andrew can really, really push, and all the MPs can push, to put in place the reduction, put back the reduction in the budget for developing countries, because they won't be able to take the actions they need to take to help us if they don't have the money to do it. And the other thing is to cancel the debt. Millions and millions and millions of pounds are coming out of those poor countries every year to pay banks and to pay rich countries for loans that they were given years ago. And that is money they need to actually put in place things to deal with climate change. So cancel the debt, put back the money that was taken out of the development aid. And the third thing, Andrew, you've already talked about, which is to make sure that government is actually serious about taking action that's needed to meet our targets in this country, rather than just saying they're going to do it.
Thank you, Hilda. And finally, just one more at the front.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm Ben Humphreys. I'm the Church of England vicar just down the road here on the estate. And this has been a fantastic evening, and everything comes together, I think, if we are able to actually have some kind of a local action plan for the White City estate. We've talked about how much space is given over to cars. There's nowhere to park a bicycle securely on the estate, leave it overnight. There's nowhere to leave a mobility scooter. There's nowhere to leave a pram. When you're living on the estate, you've got to carry it all upstairs. We don't expect the car owners to carry their cars upstairs. So, you know, there's all this thinking, and with the primary school and with, I'm sure, I don't know how many people here are actually living on the estate, but there is a conversation to continue how we can make these steps and look at what we've got, do some kind of a climate change audit for the people on White City Estate.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Father Ben. So if Hinesh, perhaps you can respond to, are we going to plant more trees, and the comment from Father Ben about the local action plan, and then we'll go over to Andy for a response to Hilda.
Thanks. Trees. I hope there is a plan to implement more trees in this borough. It's a question we get asked a lot, and it's something we'd love to do more of. The challenges with trees are they cost a lot of money to install in London, because we have dedicated so much of our space historically to pavements and roads, and they all need to be dug up if we're going to put more trees in. But we're looking at how we can be more creative with putting more trees in. So we have what we call a tiny forest. So just nearby in Hammersmith Park, we installed London's first tiny forest. So that is the size of about this room, or maybe a bit smaller, about the size of a tennis court. And that is a really dense, intense bit of space where lots of trees will grow. And that method is something we want to roll out in more places in the borough, and that will give us more trees quickly and cost effectively.
Thank you very much. And
local action plan as well. Love to follow up on that idea and work with you and others on the estate to develop a more local action plan of how we can decarbonise the borough.
Thank you, and I can see Philippa is nodding too. So, yeah.
Absolutely agreed, and same with you, Mr. Booth. Would like to come and speak to you. Yep.
Fantastic, thank you. Andy, over to you.
I think we reached a really important part of the evening. I'm sure it was carefully constructed and crafted to do that. I mean, I do want to say thank you to Parish and Francis and everyone who's organised this. But I think it's quite easy to get a bit depressed or a bit challenged by the magnitude of the task before us, particularly given that we haven't made the progress we should. But actually, partly what Hilda said and what the children were saying in that film, I think, is really quite inspiring. It wasn't a surprise to me because I go into a lot of schools here, and indeed a lot of schools come up to Parliament, and when they talk to me, when they ask me questions, a huge amount of it is about climate change. I mean, that generation really does get it. I think the only problem is we can't wait until they're adults to actually do something about it, and so the onus falls on all of us. And I think, but that is a very welcome reminder of what's happening. Now, Hilda's introduced a completely new but equally valid area of debate, and I'm afraid it's a shameful episode of politics when we, at the time when they needed it most, have cut back on that. It took, you think of the decades it took to achieve the 0.7% of GDP for the developing world, and now it's gone just at the time when it needs to be, and we tried to win a vote to get it back. I'm sure it will come back, whether under this government or a future government, but it's heartbreaking because it is going to lead to, and that's not me saying this, senior former Conservative cabinet ministers were saying, you've sentenced 100,000 of people to death, effectively, by the level of cuts that you've made here. And not all of that is climate change, it's through conflict resolution and other issues as well. But certainly, I mean, this is true of so many things that happen in this world, unfortunately. But on climate change as well, the people who are polluting most and have polluted most over the decades are the people who are suffering least, who can afford not to live in flood-ridden areas, who can afford to escape the worst effects of that. Whereas the poorest people, the people who are going to suffer in really serious ways, they are the people who've made least contribution towards it. So it's a bit much to go around and ask them to make the effort when developed countries haven't made that effort. I hope we see some of that truth coming through at COP26. I hope we can do the three things that Hilda said. And there is still, it's not being forgotten, there's still a very strong campaign to do that. It's obviously mainly with the opposition parties, but it includes building that relationship with a majority of people to make that change. You know, it isn't, even at the time of the financial difficulties of countries at the moment, it is not beyond our competence either to restore overseas aid or to deal with climate change. As Sarah said, we can't afford not to do that. So it is quite inspiring to listen to what people in the audience have said, but to listen to to be lectured by the next generation, I think, is really important for us. So I want to say thank you to the children as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much everyone for bearing with us. We do have a final reflection from Helen and Martin. Thank you. And just to reassure you, in case anyone was wondering, we've had no questions or comments through via our social media channels. So over to Helen and Martin.
As you can probably see from what we're wearing here, we're with Christian Climate Action. And so we have a whole take on this whole situation as well. Because although we've been talking this evening about practical things that we could do, that higher level could do, government and that, it's important that we actually call out the higher government powers. So this is where I suppose we're perhaps more militant, perhaps, but someone's got to do it. It would seem that petitioning, lobbying, writing letters just doesn't do it. This government, I'm sad to say, just really doesn't seem to listen to these things at all. And hence, we've had to resort to civil disobedience in the line with civil rights movements in the 50s in the States, in line with the suffragettes. When people won't listen, you have to take drastic action. Now, it's non-violent, that's the important thing, but non-violent civil disobedience. Some people say, oh, perhaps, you're extreme. But when the house is on fire, what's more extreme? To call up the alarm, sound the alarm bells, or to sit there and just watch it burn down? Both of us, we're coming from a spiritual perspective here. Alan, did you want to speak?
We met together on a pilgrimage to the G7, which was run by Christian Climate Action, but I've just been walking the Camino to COP, and I've just walked 120 miles between Bristol and Birmingham with a multi-faith group, and they're walking now 500 miles to Glasgow. And it was the most extraordinary experience, and very powerful. And everywhere we went, so many people of all faiths and no faith came out and welcomed us and fed us and encouraged us. And we really feel, that action like this, as well as civil disobedience, is so important. And when we get to Glasgow, there's going to be a continual vigil of prayer, multi-faith vigil for the whole 12 days of COP. So we're using our art, we're both artists. That's my icon and that's yours. So.
The one outside.
And we might finish with the prayer.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to reflect. Now let's just go a bit more spiritual here. Some of you will have to excuse me, I'm going to speak in Christian language here really, I suppose. Those of you who were brought up as Catholics may well have had a catechism that said God is everywhere. Now I'd just like to reflect on this. I certainly believe that God is present in every single atom, in every single cubic molecule of vacuum of space. God's Spirit is in everything, holding everything in being. Now, if that's the case, what is this world? Is it not an expression of God? All creation, it's the first Bible, that's the Word of God. All of creation is there. Now here we're moving into the realms of what I would call the cosmic Christ. Our notion of Christ as Christians is often way too small. He's the divine Word of God who existed with the Father before he was born as a human being. This is immense. So we like to think of sacred places, Fatima, Lourdes, these places. But right here, this is sacred space here, because every molecule, every bit, all time belongs to him, is filled with his Spirit. When you can meditate on that, it alters your thinking and you see things differently. Everything becomes sacred then. Pope Francis talks about this, and he talks about the dignity of all creatures. And when we use the expression kingdom of God, I like to say, get rid of that G from the word kingdom. It's the kingdom of God. And Pope Francis and Saint Francis understand this. This is so important that we come from a spiritual perspective. Jonathan Porritt, years ago, I heard him discussing with the theologian Matthew Fox. And he was head of Friends of the Earth then. And he said he realized that it was actually a spiritual issue eventually, this whole thing of his greening of his politics. Because he realized that it was all to do with how do you look at it all? How do you look at creation? Where's it coming from? Ultimately, it's to do with your cosmology. How do you see it all? And I just want to encourage everyone to go deeper, to really feel your connectedness with the earth, with everything, with everyone, with all creatures here and on the other side of the world, to feel even connected with a moon that's around a planet and another star system on a galaxy that no human will ever go to, but it's there and it's loved and held in being by God. So let's just come back to this, the presence of God here now amongst us, in the fabric of our body, which remember is recycled atoms. It's original stardust that's billions of years old, just recycled, recycled, recycled. Let's drink that in, and let's feel the pain. It's necessary to feel the pain of what's going on. And it's not pleasant. But when we do feel it, we're more inclined to act. And that's what caused me to paint that. I felt so angry when the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor. We keep hearing this expression. It's all over the place. Extinction Rebellion refer to it even, not necessarily of any faith. Cathod used this expression. Pope Francis has been using this expression, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. This is what we have to really take on inside ourselves and act from. So my prayer is that we feel that we have that connection, know that the Holy Spirit is in all of us and can guide all of us. And that includes these leaders that perhaps we see as failing. We have to pray for them. The lead up to COP26. So much is dependent on them. And we have to be praying for them. I don't know how it's going to happen. A miracle maybe. But we are going to have to pray hard for these people. So let's do all that we've been talking about this evening, but also pray, pray, pray for those people who are going to make decisions that could either save us or doom us. Feel that pain and act out of it. Act out of love, as Extinction Rebellion says. Love and rage, not violence, rage at the injustice, the terrible injustices, those poor in the world today who've lost all means of growing crops. I mean, the billions of people who will be on the move as refugees. We've seen nothing yet. COVID's a mere rehearsal for what we have to deal with in the future. It's a challenge to us to cooperate. Sadly, we're failing. The vaccine needs to go to the rest of the world, and we're not doing that. You know, there are all sorts of things like this. We've got to... It's a real challenge. Anyway, so... Helen, do you want to add anything?
Shall I just finish
Yes,
by reading this wonderful prayer by Pope Francis? It's for all faiths. A prayer for our earth.
Have you got...
You can always say it. A prayer for our earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, thank you very, very much. I'm very sorry. I know we have run completely out of time. I hope you found that a very productive and helpful discussion. I want to give thanks to all of our panel members. To just run back over. So thank you to Philippa, and Hinesh. Thank you all so very much. Did you want to share any final reflections? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So.
Oh, me first.
Yes, go for it.
No, just this has been a really good conversation. Really interested to hear more from all of you, so do get in touch with me. I'll hang about for exchange of emails or whatever, but also encourage you all to attend any or all of our COP26 Climate Carnival events that are coming up at the end of the month, so check out the website and sign up to our newsletter, and you can find all the details there.
Thank you. Pat?
I think it's a fantastically encouraging meeting. I really feel so privileged to have been here. So thank you, Father Richard, for the invitation. And I thought the kids were so inspiring, and the other video as well of the parishioners. And I don't want to give the impression that I don't think individual action is any good. I think individual action is absolutely vital. And the action of being here and communicating with each other and communicating what you think to anybody who has any influence is so important. So keep on doing that. Communicate with the council. Tell them what you want to see happening over the next 10 years, and communicate with anybody you know who has any power and influence anywhere about how serious this whole issue is.
Thank you, Pat. Andy?
Well, in about an hour and a half, we've covered everything from Thames Water and Hammersmith Bridge and council tax to overseas aid and what we do to stop the world warming up at COP26, which is a fantastic tribute to everybody who put this together and to all of you as an audience. And obviously we can only at that time touch the surface of some of these issues, but it does inspire me. I mean, I've heard some of the criticism made, for example, of Hammersmith, but I think I've been very impressed by what Hinesh has said today, and I do believe, maybe I'm biased, that the council here is good in its intent, and what we need to do is to make sure that they deliver on that. I'm less persuaded that that's true of the government at the moment, for some of the reasons I've said, but that's really my job. It's my job to hold them to account on your behalf. So carry on bombarding me with those emails and making sure, particularly in the run-up to COP26, that we do make that impression that it is inescapable, both to the government of the UK, but also to all those other governments around the world who are going to be up there in Glasgow, and I'm glad you're going up to see them, that this is something we are deadly serious about, and don't just want, expect and demand action on for all our sake, but particularly for the sake of the wonderful children we saw in that video.
Thank you. Philippa?
And I'd just like to say I actually echo a lot of what Hinesh said. We have a Transport Day as part of your Climate Festival on the 26th of October. Do come and see us at Lyric Square. Also, I am very happy as a transport officer, new transport officer, to be held accountable. So please do talk to me, and I'm happy to give you my email address, and happy to communicate with you. And also just to say, as a Christian, this is my mission to, work within climate, and echoing your call, Martin, to pray for the leaders. I just also say pray for wisdom. Pray for wisdom. We are called as Christians to pray for wisdom. So pray for wisdom for yourself, for the way that we individually can tread on the earth.
Thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Good night.
I judge that chair. Congratulations to our chair.
Thank you very much.
It's only her first week. So
Yeah.